What's happening, folks? Back with another reaction, back with some video game music, and we're going to listen to a pair of tracks from Phantasy Star, the original for the 8-bit Sega Master System, and in retrospect it's typically called Phantasy Star 1 because there were multiple sequels which followed. Now the first two games are exceedingly nostalgic for me. They're two of my favorite games of all time, on the level of Chrono Trigger or the first couple Shining Forces. Honestly, the first two Phantasy Stars are brilliant, epic, legendary. They're both very long, they're very involved, very character driven with the story. So I'll try to be brief here, but yes, I'm planning on, once I finish my playthrough of Shining Force CD, the next two long form gaming playthroughs I'm going to do are for the first Phantasy Star and then the second one. And the second one, I mean, the first one is legendary, epic, and it's regarded as a real like watershed game for multiple reasons. It really sort of broke some ground. It did things that were reminiscent of some role-playing games that existed up to that time, but they sort of became innovated and pushed into new territory with Phantasy Star 1. But Phantasy Star 2 is just an untouchable masterpiece, so more on that coming soon. The series composer for both of the first two games is Uwabo Tokuhiko, and the music in both of the first two games is brilliant. Now, there is a Phantasy Star 3 and 4, and I have them in ROM form, but I never played them back in the day, so they're just kind of like waiting as ROMs on my computer. Once we go through and beat the first two Phantasy Stars, I probably will go for 3 and 4, though my personal connection to those and my nostalgic association is basically zero, because I never played them back in the day, even though I was aware of them. Anyway, the first game is science fantasy. Again, there's spaceships, there's laser guns, there's planetary or like interplanetary travel, so it's very much sci-fi, but it is also science fantasy. And I would say the first game leans a bit more toward the science fantasy side, whereas Phantasy Star 2 leans more toward straight up science fiction, still with some science fantasy, but more science fiction proper. Anyway, I'll be brief, but the plot of the first game is that you play as a woman, which was pretty unprecedented back then. Certainly, there were only a handful of games in '87, which is when Phantasy Star 1 came out, in which the protagonist was a female. But you play as Alice, whose brother is murdered by the state fascist government which rules these three planets in the Algol star system. Parma is the planet you come from, Motavia is a desert planet, and then Deseris or Deseri is an Arctic planet, and Palma is like a green, like verdant type planet. In any case, your brother gets murdered by the fascist totalitarian government of the Algol system, and you don't really know why, but you want to get revenge for him, and with his dying breath, your brother tells you that Lassic, the king of the three planets and the head of the government, is engaging in some very shady things and trying to harness dark forces for his brutal, evil vision. So you set out on a quest to find other people who are willing to help, and you do encounter others who join your party, and you have to set off and try to defeat Lassic. Now, it's a long game, not quite as long as Phantasy Star 2, which is insanely long. But yes, it's a really epic game, there's great music, and the track I'm going to play, it's actually the way this MP3, or I think it's like an MP4, I forget exactly what it is. No, MP4 is a video file, but it's maybe it's like a WAV file. In any case, it features two tracks which play in various dungeons. Now, the first part of the track is given the name Tower, and that's actually a pretty rare tune. I think it's only played in one or two dungeons in the entire game, one of which is just legendary, and I'll talk more about that when I actually do the playthrough. But the tune, just the moment you step into this dungeon and the tune starts playing, as a kid I was like, oh crap, this sounds serious, I better get ready. And sure enough, it's just an insane dungeon. The second one is called Cave, and it plays in not just some caves, but also some proper dungeons. But though it's more common, you hear it a lot more often, and you hear it very early in the game. So yes, ultimately, these are two tracks which indicate the style of the soundtrack for Phantasy Star 1 and really give some atmosphere. And as I said, the track Tower, which starts this WAV file, I'll never forget hearing it because I used to, sort of sit in one of the dungeons or in this dungeon where it plays, and I was just like, man, this tune is so epic. I, almost want to just like record this on a cassette tape or something. So, in any case, let's give it a listen. This is from Phantasy Star 1 and 2 composer Tokuhiko, or rather Uwabo Tokuhiko, to say it in the Japanese way, and the tracks are called Tower and Cave. And again, old school gaming tracks, 8 and 16-bit systems, they were typically just loops, 45 seconds, 1 minute, and then they would loop back to the start. But yes, especially that tower track, it just will always be legendary to me. And indeed, like if you go look for videos here on YouTube of that track, you'll see a lot of the comments are equally nostalgic, and there's a lot of people talking about, wait, like I would get so lost in these dungeons. There's one guy I remember who commented, it was like left, right, like, where the hell am I now? Which is to say, the game, like in the outdoors areas and in the towns, is like this overhead view, like most role-playing games, but in the actual dungeons, it's first-person isometric view. So you're like walking down halls, you have to turn left or right, and back in the day, I was like 87, I probably didn't play it till like 88, so I was like a 7-8-year-old kid, and they're huge sprawling dungeons with multiple levels, including with traps where you can fall through. Like if you're on level 6, you might fall down to level 5 suddenly, and then it's like not clear exactly where you are on level 5. So, ultimately there were strategy guides that people eventually published, but when I was playing it, I didn't have any of those, and I wasn't necessarily one of those people who was gonna like, take graph paper and try to chart out the level. So it was really just like a vibes thing where I was like, okay, left, or I went left, like I'm going to try to go right this time, and oh wait, I'm back here again, okay, so I'm going to go the other way this time. And you really would get turned around and get lost, and all the time you're fighting enemies, and your health and the items that you have available are dropping, and it was like, holy crap, am I going to be able to finish this? And if you die, like you go back to your last save. But if you save in a dungeon and you don't have enough to get back out or to complete the dungeon, you could basically ruin your entire playthrough because you might get stuck and then you're not able to get out of the dungeon or complete it. So yeah, there was a lot of epic times where I would spend multiple hours in a dungeon, breathlessly, like, oh my god, am I going to be able to beat this? And thankfully, I beat both games. They're both worth the journey. So as I said, when I finish my playthrough of Shining Force CD, I think the next long playthroughs will be Phantasy Star 1, followed by Phantasy Star 2. And then after that, perhaps Phantasy Stars 3 and 4. Though, again, I don't have a personal connection to those. I never played those. So that will be entirely new to me. But yes, the music in both of the first two games are epic. Shout out to Uwabo Tokuhiko. Do let me know what you think, and I'm probably going to do a reaction to some music from Phantasy Star 2 in the same batch. Which, to be fair, I did one Phantasy Star 2 music reaction now, like 2-3 years ago. But yes, I'll do a couple more in this batch. So, let me know what you think. I will see you next time. Peace.